The Galactic Council watched in stunned disbelief as the emergency holofeed from Nimbus 9 showed human soldiers tearing through Vorta troops like rabid beasts, superheated slugs shrieking from their rifles to punch bloody holes through alien bodies. Lieutenant David Hill crouched behind a smoldering Vorta APC, his platoon whittled down to a dozen battered survivors. Plasma fire sizzled overhead as the stench of burned flesh clogged his nostrils. Hours earlier, Hill had led his men on a routine training op with the Vorta garrison commanded by Weezon. The arrogant aliens sneered at the pitiful human soldiers despite their elite skills. Then a distress call, a Vorta outpost attacked by Krugath raiders. Weezon mobilized his troops and abandoned the humans, eager to prove Vorta superiority. But everything changed when Hill got new orders from Earth. Nimbus 9 hostile, evac civilians, lethal force authorized. As Vorta ships descended on the human encampment with weapons charged, Hill knew his only choice was to fight. If his platoon fell here, the Krugath would butcher the colony's 10,000 human civilians. Failure meant genocide. Hill checked his rifle and steeled himself for the Vorta onslaught. The Galactic Council was about to learn the terrible cost of underestimating humanity's wolves of war. "Listen up, Marines," Hill barked, ducking as a plasma bolt sizzled overhead. "New intel just came in. That distress call? It was bullshit. The Vorta used it as an excuse to take over the Trellium mines. They played us like a fiddle." The battered soldiers exchanged grim looks. Trellium was essential for jump drives. Losing the mines would cripple Earth's fleet. Hill's mind raced, pieces falling into place. The joint exercises, Weezon's probing questions about their tactics and gear. It had all been a setup. "Valdez," Hill shouted over the din of battle. "Take Jansen and Pulaski, slip past their lines and evac the civilians. The rest of you on me. We're taking back those dropships before the Vorta can strand us here." As Valdez and his team vanished into the smoke, Hill led the remaining Marines in a desperate charge. They wove through shattered buildings, sidestepping Vorta corpses. A checkpoint loomed ahead, a lone IFV and a dozen alien soldiers blocking their path. Weezon strutted forward, eyes narrowed. "Lieutenant Hill, just where do you think you're going?" "Weezon." Hill's grip tightened on his rifle. "I don't have time for this. Stand aside." The Vorta commander sneered. "Not until you submit to an inspection. We wouldn't want you absconding with sensitive equipment now, would we?" Hill squared his shoulders. "Operational authority. We're Oscar Mike, and that's all you need to know." Weezon's troops aimed their weapons as the human Marines did the same. Claws twitched over triggers. Sweat beaded on Hill's brow. The standoff stretched for an eternity. "LT Valdez, civvies are green. Repeat, civvies are green." At Valdez's tinny voice, Hill allowed himself a predatory grin. "Weezon, here's the deal. In about 5 minutes, a company of Force Recon is going to drop right on your scaly head. You can walk away now, or you can find out what your guts look like. Choose fast." The Vorta's eyes flicked to the sky, searching for human dropships. With a snarl, he signaled his troops to lower their rifles. "This isn't over, Hill. When the Council hears of your treachery, your precious Earth will burn." As the Vorta withdrew, Hill knew this was just the beginning. Weezon would be back, with an army at his back. But for now, the colonists were safe, and the Marines had a fighting chance. It was time to show the galaxy what happened when you poked the hornet's nest. As the dropships carrying the civilians lifted off, a barrage of plasma fire erupted from hidden Vorta AA nests. Hill watched in horror as one of the ships took a direct hit, flames engulfing its port engine. The craft listed heavily, trailing smoke as it plummeted towards the jungle below. "Valdez, get those civvies out of here," Hill shouted into his comm. "We'll handle the rescue op." With a crackle of acknowledgement, Valdez's dropship banked hard and accelerated towards the upper atmosphere. Hill turned to his battered platoon, their faces grim beneath the flickering lights of the command center. "Gear up, Marines. We're going in quiet. Cloaks and whispers only." The soldiers nodded, checking their rifles and activating their cloaking fields. They moved out in a silent blur, ghosting through the colony's deserted streets towards the distant plume of smoke. As they approached the crash site, Hill's thermal imager lit up with heat signatures scattered throughout the dense foliage. His stomach clenched as he saw smaller, unarmed figures fleeing from larger, armed pursuers. Vorta kill teams, eager to slaughter the helpless survivors. With a series of quick hand gestures, Hill deployed his platoon in a pincer formation. They crept through the undergrowth, closing in on the unsuspecting Vorta. At Hill's signal, they struck. Silenced rounds tore through the alien soldiers, dropping them in sprays of luminous blood. The Vorta barely had time to react before the humans were upon them, combat knives flashing in the dappled sunlight. Hill himself dispatched a Vorta sergeant with a precise thrust to the throat. The alien's gurgling cry cut short. But the victory was short-lived. A plasma bolt caught Private Jennings in the chest, burning through his armor effortlessly. He crumpled to the ground, eyes wide with shock. Hill cursed, realizing they'd missed a Vorta sniper nest in the canopy above. "Suppressing fire," he barked, and his Marines unleashed a hail of bullets into the trees. The snipers fell like rotten fruit, but the damage was done. 2 more of Hill's men lay unmoving, their cloaks flickering and fading. Hill pushed down the rage and grief threatening to overwhelm him. They had to keep moving, had to get the civilians to safety. He gathered the survivors, herding them towards a hidden network of caves used by the colony's geologists. As they fled deeper into the tunnels, the ground shook with the impact of orbital bombardment. The Vorta were done playing games. Hill knew they had minutes at best before the caves were swarmed with enemy troops. Thinking fast, he rigged the wrecked dropship with a daisy chain of demo charges, turning it into a makeshift bomb. With luck, the blast would distract the Vorta long enough for Hill's team to escape with the civilians. "Fire in the hole!" Hill yelled, triggering the detonator as they ducked behind a rocky outcropping. The explosion ripped through the jungle, sending a geyser of flaming debris skyward. In the chaos, Hill and the survivors slipped away, vanishing into the twisting labyrinth of tunnels. But even as they ran, Hill knew this was nowhere near the end. Wazan would not rest until every human on Nimbus 9 was dead or enslaved. The battle for the colony, and perhaps the fate of humanity itself, had only just begun. As the last echoes of the explosion faded, Hill led the survivors out of the winding tunnels. They emerged into a small clearing, the jungle canopy above shredded by the orbital bombardment. Hill's heart sank as he scanned the sky, searching for any sign of Valdez's dropship. "LT, we've got a problem," Corporal Ramirez called out, pointing to a plume of smoke rising from a distant ridge. That's where Valdez was headed. Hill cursed under his breath. If the Vorta had shot down the dropship, they were well and truly stranded. He turned to the civilians, their faces etched with fear and exhaustion. "And we need to keep moving," he said, trying to project a confidence he didn't feel. "The Vorta will be searching for us. Stay close and stay quiet." As they set off into the jungle, Hill's mind raced. They were outgunned and outnumbered, with limited supplies and no way to call for help. They needed to even the odds, and fast. An idea formed in his mind, a desperate gamble. He signaled his platoon to halt and gathered them around. "Listen up," he said, keeping his voice low. "There's a Vorta supply depot about 2 clicks north of here. We're going to raid it." The Marines exchanged glances, some skeptical, others grimly determined. They knew the risks, but they also knew they had no choice. "Ramirez, you're with me. We'll infiltrate the depot and grab whatever weapons and gear we can. The rest of you stay here and guard the civilians. If we're not back in an hour, head for the mountains and don't look back." With a chorus of "Yes, sir," the Marines took up defensive positions around the clearing. Hill and Ramirez set off into the jungle, moving swiftly and silently through the undergrowth. As they approached the supply depot, they could hear the guttural voices of Vorta soldiers. Hill signaled Ramirez to halt and surveyed the compound through his binoculars. A dozen guards patrolled the perimeter, their plasma rifles glinting in the harsh sunlight. Crates of weapons and supplies were stacked haphazardly around a central courtyard, guarded by a pair of heavy turrets. Hill's eyes narrowed as he spotted a small boxy device nestled among the crates. A portable quantum entanglement communicator, capable of instantly transmitting messages across vast distances. With that, they could contact Earth and call for reinforcements. "We need that QEC," Hill whispered to Ramirez. "Here's the plan." Moving with practiced precision, the two Marines crept towards the compound. They timed their approach to coincide with a gap in the patrols, slipping past the guards and into the maze of crates. As Ramirez kept watch, Hill pried open a crate marked with the Vorta symbol for medical supplies. He grabbed a handful of field dressings and stuffed them into his pack, along with a few precious vials of nanite healing gel. "LT, we've got company," Ramirez hissed, ducking down as a patrol passed by their hiding spot. Hill cursed silently, his hand tightening on his rifle. They were running out of time. With a quick hand signal, he directed Ramirez to create a distraction while he made a grab for the QEC. Ramirez nodded and slipped away, circling around to the far side of the compound. A moment later, a series of explosions rocked the depot as the Marine tossed grenades into a stack of fuel barrels. Vorta soldiers shouted in alarm, rushing towards the flames. In the chaos, Hill sprinted for the courtyard, dodging plasma bolts as the guards opened fire. He dove behind a crate, wincing as a bolt sizzled past his ear. The QEC was only a few meters away, but the turrets had him pinned down. He needed a miracle. Suddenly, a hail of gunfire erupted from the jungle beyond the compound. Ramirez, having circled back around, was laying down suppressing fire with a stolen Vorta plasma cannon. The turret swiveled to face the new threat, and Hill seized his chance. He lunged for the QEC, snatching it up and tucking it into his pack. Then, with a burst of speed, he sprinted for the tree line, Ramirez close behind. Plasma bolts scorched the ground at their heels as they fled, but they didn't stop running until they were deep in the jungle, the supply depot far behind them. Panting heavily, Hill leaned against a tree and pulled out the QEC. His fingers flew over the controls, inputting the encrypted frequency for Earth Command. "This is Lieutenant David Hill of the 112th Marine Battalion," he said, his voice ragged with exhaustion. "Nimbus 9 has been compromised. The Vorta have betrayed us. We need immediate reinforcements." For a long moment there was only static. Then a voice crackled through the speaker. "Lieutenant Hill, this is Admiral Nakamura of the Earth Defense Fleet. We read you loud and clear. Reinforcements are en route. ETA, 6 hours. Hold tight, Marine. Help is on the way." Hill closed his eyes, relief washing over him. They had done it. They had called for help. Now they just had to survive long enough for it to arrive. But even as he savored the small victory, a new sound echoed through the jungle. The distant roar of flames and the crack of falling trees. The Vorta, it seemed, were not content to wait for their prey to come to them. Wezen stood atop a burnt-out husk of a human APC, his eyes blazing with rage as he surveyed the devastation. The human scum had dared to defy him, had dared to spit in the face of Vorta superiority. "Burn it all," he snarled to his subordinates. "Flush them out like the vermin they are. I want their charred bones at my feet by nightfall." As the flames spread, consuming the jungle in a hellish inferno, Hill and his Marines fled deeper into the undergrowth. The heat was unbearable, the smoke choking their lungs and stinging their eyes. They stumbled into a clearing, coughing and gasping for air, and then they saw it. A massive stone temple, its ancient walls covered in alien glyphs and strange, twisting symbols. Hill hesitated for only a moment before leading his people inside, the cool darkness a welcome respite from the raging firestorm outside. As they explored the temple's winding corridors, they discovered something extraordinary. A hidden vault, filled with weapons unlike any they had ever seen. Sleek rifles that pulsed with an eerie blue light, humming with barely contained power. Grenades that seemed to warp the very fabric of space around them, and a suit of armor that shimmered like quicksilver, its surface alive with swirling fractal patterns. Hill picked up one of the rifles, feeling its weight in his hands. He turned to his Marines, a grim smile on his face. Looks like our luck just changed, he said, his voice echoing in the ancient chamber. Let's show these Vorta bastards what happens when you mess with the human race. As the distant roar of the firestorm grew louder, Hill knew their time was running out. He gathered his marines and the civilians in the temple's main chamber, the eerie blue glow of the alien weapons casting shadows on their faces. Listen up, he said, his voice calm and steady. We've got a chance to get the civilians out of here, but we need to move fast. Ramirez, you're going to lead them to the river. There's a hidden cache of fishing boats there, left over from the early days of the colony. Use them to reach the ocean and link up with the fleet. Ramirez nodded, his expression grim. What about you, LT? Hill hefted one of the alien rifles, its surface thrumming with power. The rest of us will stay here and buy you some time. We'll fortify the temple, set up some nasty surprises for our scaly friends. The Marines exchanged glances, their faces etched with a mix of willpower and fear. They knew the odds they were facing, but they also knew their duty. As Ramirez led the civilians out of the temple, Hill and his remaining troops got to work. They welded scavenged metal plates over the entrances, rigged tripwires and pressure plates linked to the alien grenades, and set up firing positions in the narrow windows. Private Nguyen, the platoon's tech specialist, figured out how to interface the alien energy cannon with the temple's power grid, turning it into a makeshift turret. Hill positioned it at the main entrance, its barrel glowing with an ominous red light. They barely had time to catch their breath before the Vorta attacked. A wave of plasma fire slammed into the temple walls, followed by the thunder of armored vehicles and the shouts of alien soldiers. Hill's Marines opened fire, the alien rifles spitting bolts of searing blue energy that cut through the Vorta's shields like they were made of paper. The air filled with the stench of burnt flesh and ozone as the aliens fell in droves, their bodies disintegrating into piles of ash. But the Vorta kept coming, heedless of their losses. They swarmed over the temple walls, their claws scrabbling on the ancient stone. Hill saw Private Nguyen go down, a plasma bolt burning through his chest. Sergeant Alvarez fell next, his screams cut short as a Vorta soldier ripped out his throat. Hill gritted his teeth and kept firing, the alien rifle growing hot in his hands. They were being overrun, but every second they held out was another second for the civilians to get away. Suddenly a shadow fell over the battlefield. Hill looked up to see a massive Vorta battlecruiser hanging in the sky, its hull filled with gun batteries. Wazen's voice crackled over the comms, dripping with rage. You have fought well, human, but now you will die. The ship's cannons opened fire, a rain of plasma bombs that shook the temple to its foundations. Stone blocks crumbled and fell, crushing Marines and Vorta alike. Hill knew they couldn't hold out any longer. He keyed his comm, shouting over the din of battle. All units fall back to the river. I repeat, fall back to the river. As his Marines disengaged, fighting a desperate rearguard action, Hill stayed behind. He climbed into the gunner's seat of the alien cannon, its controls thrumming beneath his fingers. He swung the barrel towards the Vorta lines and opened fire, a lance of pure energy that vaporized everything in its path. Tanks melted like wax, soldiers burst into flames, and the very ground itself turned to glass. For a moment, the Vorta advance faltered, but then the battlecruiser's guns found their mark and the world turned white. Hill felt a searing pain, and then darkness claimed him. Miles away, Ramirez and the civilians reached the river. They piled into the waiting boats, their engines coughing to life. As they sped downstream, Ramirez looked back at the distant temple, now engulfed in flames and smoke. He thought of Hill and the other Marines, fighting and dying to give them this chance. He thought of the battles yet to come, the war that had only just begun. And he swore a silent oath, to himself and to the memory of the fallen. The Vorta would pay for what they had done. Humanity would make them pay, no matter the consequences. As the temple crumbled around him, Lieutenant David Hill gripped the controls of the alien energy cannon, its shield flickering under the onslaught of the Vorta battlecruiser's bombardment. Sweat poured down his face, mixing with the blood from a gash on his forehead. He knew this was the end, but he'd be damned if he didn't take as many of these scaly bastards with him as he could. Suddenly, a new sound filled the air, a deep thrumming that seemed to shake the very ground beneath his feet. Hill looked up, his eyes widening as a massive human warship emerged from the clouds, its hull gleaming in the sunlight. The USS Odyssey had arrived, and it was not alone. A swarm of smaller ships poured from its hangar bays, fighters and dropships racing towards the planet's surface. The Vorta battlecruiser, caught off guard, tried to turn its guns on the new threat, but it was too late. A salvo of missiles slammed into its shields, followed by a volley of railgun rounds that punched through its armor, with minimal resistance. As the battlecruiser listed to one side, flames erupting from its hull, the human dropships descended on the battlefield. Their hatches opened, revealing the gleaming power armor of the Ranger Battalion, humanity's most elite warriors. The Rangers hit the ground running, their weapons spitting streams of superheated plasma as they charged towards the Vorta lines. The aliens, already reeling from the sudden arrival of the human fleet, were no match for the Rangers' advanced weaponry and training. Hill watched in awe as a Ranger in a hulking suit of exoskeleton armor leaped over a burning Vorta tank, his fist smashing through its turret like a wrecking ball. Another Ranger, armed with a shoulder-mounted railgun, picked off Vorta snipers with pinpoint accuracy, their heads exploding in sprays of luminous blood. In the midst of the chaos, a dropship landed near the ruined temple, its ramp lowering to reveal a squad of Rangers. They moved towards Hill, their armor shining in the firelight. "Lieutenant Hill," the lead Ranger asked, his voice crackling through his helmet's speakers. "Sergeant Major Chen, 75th Ranger Regiment. We're here to get you out." Hill shook his head, his grip tightening on the energy cannon's controls. "Negative, Sergeant Major. I've got a job to finish." Chen nodded, understanding in his eyes. The civilians. "Safe thanks to my Marines, but the Vorta still hold the Trellium mines. If they detonate the charges—" "They won't," Chen said firmly. "We've got a squad en route to disarm them. But we need you to buy them time." Hill grinned, a feral gleam in his eyes. "With pleasure." As the Rangers fanned out, securing the area around the temple, Hill swung the energy cannon towards the distant mines. He could see Vorta soldiers swarming around the entrance, setting charges and preparing to withdraw. At their center was Vazen, his face contorted with rage as he barked orders to his troops. The Vorta commander knew the battle was lost, but he was determined to deny the humans their prize. Hill lined up his shot, the cannon's targeting reticule glowing red as it locked onto Vazen's position. He took a deep breath, his finger tightening on the trigger. But before he could fire, a plasma bolt slammed into the cannon's shield, sending sparks flying. Hill cursed, spinning to see a squad of Vorta soldiers advancing on his position, their weapons blazing. He returned fire, the cannon's energy pulses vaporizing the aliens where they stood. But more kept coming, pouring out of the jungle like a swarm of angry hornets. Hill knew he couldn't hold them off forever. He keyed his comm, shouting over the din of battle. "Ranger Squad, what's your status?" A burst of static, then a voice replied, "Charges disarmed, Lieutenant. The mines are secure." Hill let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Good work, Rangers. Now get the hell out of there." As the Ranger Squad evacuated the mines, Hill turned his attention back to Vazen. The Vorta commander was retreating, his troops laying down covering fire as they fled towards their waiting dropships. Hill wasn't about to let them escape. He leapt from the temple's shattered walls, the alien cannon clutched tight in his hands. He hit the ground running, his boots pounding on the scorched earth as he closed the distance to Vazen's position. The Vorta soldiers saw him coming, their eyes widening in fear as they raised their weapons. But Hill was faster. He dodged and weaved, the cannon's shield absorbing the few shots that managed to hit him. He reached the first dropship just as its engines roared to life, its ramp starting to rise. With a final burst of speed, Hill leaped inside, his momentum carrying him into the midst of the startled Vorta troops. What followed was a blur of violence and blood. Hill fought like a man possessed, the cannon smashing through armor and bone alike. The Vorta soldiers fell before him, their weapons useless against the cannon's shield. In the end, only Wezen was left, his once pristine uniform torn and stained with the blood of his own men. The Vorta commander stared at Hill, his eyes burning with hatred. "You think you've won, human," he snarled, his claws flexing. "You think your precious Earth is safe? This is only the beginning." Hill said nothing. He simply raised the cannon, its barrel glowing with barely contained energy. Wezen lunged, his claws slashing towards Hill's throat, but the human was ready. He sidestepped the blow, his free hand lashing out to grab Wezen's wrist. With a twist and a sickening crack, he snapped the Vorta's arm, like a twig. Wezen howled in pain, his other hand scrabbling for his sidearm. But Hill was faster. He brought the cannon down on Wezen's head, the blow sending the Vorta commander crumpling to the deck. As Wezen lay there, his breath coming in ragged gasps, Hill knelt beside him. He grabbed the Vorta by the collar, hauling him up to look him in the eye. "It's over, Wezen," he growled. "Your forces are in retreat. The mines are ours, and you're going to spend the rest of your miserable life in a cell, thinking about the day you fucked with the human race." Wezen's eyes flashed with defiance, but it was a hollow gesture. He knew he was beaten. With a final snarl, he went limp in Hill's grasp, his head lolling to one side. Hill let him fall, his own breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked around the dropship's hold at the bodies of the Vorta soldiers he had killed. It was a scene of carnage and death, but it was a victory. Nimbus 9 was safe, its people freed from the threat of Vorta oppression. As he stepped out of the dropship, the sun rising over the ruined temple, Hill knew that this was only the beginning. The Vorta would be back, their fury stoked by the humiliation of defeat. But for now, in this moment, he allowed himself a small measure of satisfaction. He had done his duty, he had protected his people, and he had shown the galaxy the true strength of the human spirit. Whatever came next, he would be ready. They all would. With Nimbus 9 secure and Wezen in custody, the human fleet turned its attention to uncovering the full extent of the Vorta's treachery. Captain Hill strode through the brig of the Odyssey, his boots ringing on the metal deck. He came to a stop outside Wezen's cell, where the Vorta commander sat slumped on a narrow bunk. "Start talking," Hill growled, his eyes hard as flint. "Who gave the order to attack Nimbus 9? Wezen looked up, his scales dull in the harsh light. "You think I'll betray my people so easily?" "Your people?" Hill scoffed. "You mean the ones you led to their deaths?" The Vorta's claws dug into his palms, but he remained silent. Hill leaned closer, his voice low and dangerous. "We have ways of making you talk, Wezen. Ways that make your interrogation techniques look like a child's game. So you can either start cooperating, or we can do this the hard way." Something in Hill's eyes must have convinced Wezen of his sincerity. With a shudder, the Vorta began to speak, his voice hardly more than a whisper. "There is a faction within the Vorta government, a secret cabal that has been manipulating events for decades. They call themselves the Shadow Masters, and their leader is known only as the Overseer." Hill frowned. "The Overseer? What's their endgame?" "Domination," Wezen replied, his gaze distant. "They believe the Vorta are destined to rule the galaxy, and they'll stop at nothing to achieve that goal. The attack on Nimbus 9 was just one small part of their plan." As Wezen spoke, the pieces began to fall into place in Hill's mind. The Shadow Masters had used the Galactic Council as a puppet, manipulating its decisions to weaken potential rivals and gather resources for their own agenda. The joint exercises on Nimbus 9 had been a perfect opportunity to test human capabilities and sow discord between the two species. "What about the weapons we found in the temple?" Hill asked, his mind racing. "The ones that gave us an edge against your forces?" Wezen's eyes widened. "You used Prothean weaponry? Impossible! The Protheans vanished centuries ago." "Well, they left some parting gift," Hill said grimly. "And it sounds like they had good reason to. What do you know about them?" The Vorta hesitated, then seemed to deflate. The Protheans were an ancient species, technologically advanced far beyond any other. They fought against the Vorta long ago, before the formation of the Council. Some say they were the only ones who could have stopped the Shadow Masters, but then they disappeared and their secrets were lost. Until now, it seems. Hill digested this information, his mind whirling with the implications. If the Protheans had been fighting the Vorta, then the weapons they left behind could be the key to stopping the Shadow Masters. But first, they needed to know more. He turned to leave, then paused. "This isn't over, Wazen. You'd better hope your intel checks out, because if it doesn't, I'll be back. And I won't be alone." As Hill emerged onto the Odyssey's bridge, the ship's comm officer looked up sharply. "Sir, we're receiving a distress call from the colony on Hyperion. They're under attack by unknown forces." Hill's heart made. The Shadow Masters weren't wasting any time. "Set a course for Hyperion, maximum speed, and get me aligned to Admiral Nakamura. We're going to need reinforcements." As the Odyssey leaped into warp, stars blurring past the viewports, Hill felt a new sense of purpose settle over him. The battle for Nimbus 9 had been won, but the war was just beginning, and this time the fate of the stars itself hung in the balance. As the Odyssey emerged from warp above the besieged colony, Hill's heart sank at the sight before him. The planet's surface was swarming with insectoid creatures, their chitinous exoskeletons glinting in the sunlight as they rampaged through the human settlement. Plasma blasts erupted from their organic weapons, setting buildings ablaze and sending civilians fleeing in terror. "What the hell are those things?" Sergeant Chen whispered, his eyes wide with disbelief. Hill shook his head, his grip tightening on the ship's tactical display. "Unknown hostiles, but they're not Vorta, that's for sure." He turned to the comm officer, his voice sharp with urgency. "Get me aligned to the colony's defense forces. We need to coordinate our response." But the comm channels were a mess of static and garbled screams. The insectoid swarm seemed to be jamming all frequencies, their hive mind coordination allowing them to anticipate and counter human strategies with terrifying efficiency. As the Odyssey's Marines prepared to deploy, Hill felt a growing sense of unease. The swarm, as he had mentally dubbed them, moved with a purpose that belied mere animalistic savagery. Their attack patterns were too precise, too focused on key infrastructure and defensive points. "They're not just here to destroy," he muttered, studying the tactical readouts. "They're looking for something." The answer came as the Marines touched down on the planet's surface, their drop pods slamming into the Earth amidst the chaos of battle. As Hill and his team fought their way through the swarming hordes, they stumbled upon a hidden entrance to an underground facility, one that the swarm seemed to be converging on with single-minded tenacity. Inside the facility, they found a scene of carnage. Human scientists lay dead at their workstations, their bodies torn apart by vicious claws. But amidst the destruction, a single survivor huddled in a reinforced panic room, Dr. Elias Kepler, the lead researcher. "They came out of nowhere," Kepler gasped, his face pale with shock. "We were studying the Prothean technology, trying to reverse engineer it, but then the swarm attacked like they knew what we were doing." Hill's mind raced, piecing together the implications. The swarm wasn't just a random enemy. They were a force with an agenda, one that seemed to center on the Prothean artifacts. "What were you working on, Doctor?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. Kepler hesitated, then pulled up a schematic on his datapad. A neural interface device, one that could potentially tap into the swarm's hive mind. We thought we could use it to control them, to turn their own weapons against them. Hill studied the schematic, hope warring with trepidation in his gut. If the device worked, it could be a game-changer, but if the swarm got their claws on it... His thoughts were interrupted by a bone-shaking roar that echoed through the facility. The Marines spun, weapons raised as a massive insectoid creature burst through the reinforced walls like they were made of paper. It was a queen, Hill realized with a surge of dread. A swarm queen, larger and more heavily armored than the drones they had been fighting, and in its multifaceted eyes he saw a glimmer of malevolent intelligence, a cunning that far surpassed the mindless savagery of its minions. The Queen lunged forward, its razor-sharp talons slicing through the air towards Kepler. Hill reacted on instinct, tackling the scientist out of the way and rolling to his feet with his rifle raised. But the Queen was fast, its chitinous hide shrugging off the hail of bullets as it charged towards the device. Hill knew that if the swarm got their hands on the neural interface, it would all be over. He looked to his Marines, seeing the unyielding commitment in their eyes. They knew the stakes, knew what they had to do. With a roar of defiance, they charged towards the Queen, their weapons blazing. They would hold the line, buy time for Kepler to activate the device and turn the tide of battle. As the Queen's talons closed around him, Hill felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. This was what he was born for, what he had trained for all his life. He just hoped it would be enough. Hill gritted his teeth as the Queen's talons raked across his armor, sparks flying from the impact. He rolled to the side, bringing his rifle to bear and unleashing a hail of bullets that ricocheted off the creature's chitinous hide. Around him, his team fought with desperate fury, their weapons blazing as they sought to keep the Queen at bay. "Doc, now would be a good time," Hill shouted over the din of battle, dodging another swipe from the Queen's razor-sharp claws. Dr. Kepler, his face pale but determined, hunched over the Prothean device, his fingers flying across its alien controls. "Almost there," he called back, his voice strained. "Just a few more seconds." The Queen let out a deafening roar, rearing up to its full height. Its multifaceted eyes glowed with an eerie, otherworldly light as it prepared to charge. Hill braced himself, knowing that they couldn't hold out much longer. Suddenly, the Prothean device pulsed with energy, a wave of shimmering blue light washing over the room. The Queen staggered, its roar turning to a high-pitched keen of pain. Hill felt a searing sensation in his mind, like a white-hot needle being driven into his skull. And then he heard it, a voice ancient and alien echoing through his thoughts. "Human," it said, its tone a mixture of surprise and grudging respect. "You have courage to stand against us." Hill realized with a start that he was hearing the Queen's thoughts, transmitted through the neural link created by the Prothean device. He took a deep breath, struggling to focus through the pain. "We don't want to fight you," he said, his words echoing in the mental landscape. "But you attacked our people. Why?" The Queen's presence shifted, a sense of urgency and fear bleeding through the link. "We had no choice," it said. "We are hunted, pursued by an enemy that seeks our extinction." Some images flashed through Hill's mind, a kaleidoscope of nightmarish visions. He saw a galaxy in flames, worlds consumed by the relentless advance of a machine race, their ships like living nightmares that blotted out the stars. He saw the swarm fleeing, their once mighty empire reduced to scattered remnants, desperately searching for a way to fight back. "The Reapers," the Queen said, its voice tinged with a mixture of hatred and terror. "They are the true threat, the destroyers of worlds. They have haunted our steppes for centuries, culling the galaxy of all organic life." Hill's mind reeled with the implications. If what the Queen was saying was true, then the Vorta's actions took on a new, sinister light. Were they merely pawns in the Reaper's game, unwitting accomplices to genocide? "The Prothean technology," Hill said, piecing it together. "That's what you are after. You think it can stop the Reapers." The Queen's presence pulsed with affirmation. "The Protheans were the only ones who ever stood against the Reapers and survived," it said. "Their knowledge, their weapons, are the key to our salvation." Hill took a deep breath, his mind racing. He thought of the devastation he had seen on Nimbus 9, the countless lives lost to the Vorta's treachery. If the Reapers were behind it all, then humanity was in more danger than he had ever imagined. He made his decision in an instant, the weight of it settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. "So we have a common enemy," he said, his voice firm with willpower. "The Reapers threaten us all. If we work together, combine our strengths, we might have a chance." The Queen was silent for a long moment, its presence probing, evaluating. Hill could sense its hesitation, the ingrained distrust of centuries of conflict. But there was something else there, too, a glimmer of hope, a recognition of the strength and tenacity of the human spirit. "You propose an alliance," the Queen said at last, its tone cautious but intrigued. "A joining of forces to face the Reapers as one." Hill nodded, the motion translating through the mental link. "We're stronger together than we are apart," he said, "and if the Vorta are working with the Reapers, even unwittingly, we'll need to confront them as well." The Queen's presence shifted, a sense of fierce dedication settling over the link. "Then let it be so," it said. "The swarm will fight alongside you, human. Together we will stand against the darkness." As the link faded, Hill found himself back in the ruined research facility, his team staring at him with a mixture of awe and concern. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the Queen's presence still lingering in his mind. "We have a new mission," he said, his voice steady with purpose, "and new allies. It's time to take the fight to the Reapers and to anyone who stands with them." He looked to Dr. Kepler, who was cradling the Prothean device with a look of wonder on his face. "Doctor, I need you to find out everything you can about this technology. We're going to need every advantage we can get." Kepler nodded, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "I'll get right on it, Captain. If the Protheans found a way to fight the Reapers, we'll find it too." Hill turned to his team, seeing the grit in their eyes, the readiness to face whatever came next. They had been through hell together, and he knew they would follow him to the ends of the galaxy if that's what it took. "All right, people," he said, shouldering his rifle. "Let's move out. We've got a war to win." As they emerged from the ruined facility, the swarm forces parting before them like a living tide, Hill felt a new sense of purpose settling over him. The battle for Nimbus 9 had been only the beginning, a prelude to a conflict that would shake the very foundations of the galaxy. But with the swarm at their side and the knowledge of the Protheans to guide them, he knew that humanity would not face this threat alone. They would stand together, united against the darkness, and they would prevail. No matter the cost. As the unlikely alliance between humanity and the swarm solidified, Captain Hill found himself at the forefront of a united offensive against the Reapers and their Vorta conspirators. The Odyssey, now a command center for the joint forces, buzzed with activity as Hill and the Swarm Queen coordinated their next moves. "Our intel suggests that the Vorta are massing their forces at a secret base in the Caldari Nebula," Hill said, pointing to a holographic star map. "If we can take it out, we'll cripple their ability to support the Reapers." The Queen's multifaceted eyes glimmered with anticipation. "My warriors are ready," she said, her voice resonating through the neural link. "We will strike as one." The raid on the Vorta base was just the beginning. In the weeks that followed, Hill and his team, bolstered by the swarm's numbers and ferocity, launched a series of daring missions across the galaxy. They sabotaged Reaper supply lines, intercepted Vorta communications, and exposed the conspirators' machinations to the Galactic Council. With each victory, more and more of the Council races rallied to their cause. The Prothean technology, reverse-engineered by Dr. Kepler and his team, gave the Allies a fighting chance against the Reapers' advanced weaponry. But even as they gained ground, Hill knew that the true battle lay ahead. Through the intelligence they had gathered, they had pinpointed the heart of the Reapers' domain, a colossal Dyson sphere constructed around a black hole, drawing upon its immense gravitational power. "That's where we'll find the Reaper leader," Hill said, his voice grim. "And that's where we'll end this once and for all." The combined forces of humanity, the swarm and their allies, assembled for the final assault. Ships of every shape and size, overflowing with weapons both familiar and alien, gathered at the edge of the black hole's accretion disk. Hill, standing on the bridge of the Odyssey, felt the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. He looked to the Swarm Queen, hovering beside him, her presence a steady anchor in his mind. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The Queen's response was a surge of tenacity, a fierce perseverance that flooded through the neural link. "We are one," she said, "in this battle and in all battles to come." Hill nodded, his heart made. He turned to the crew, his eyes blazing with purpose. "All ships, prepare to engage. We're going in." The Allied fleet plunged into the maelstrom, the black hole's gravity twisting and distorting the fabric of space around them. Reaper ships, their hulls pulsing with malevolent energy, swarmed to meet them, their weapons tearing through the void. The battle was chaos incarnate, a whirlwind of fire and destruction that lit up the darkness. The Odyssey and its companions fought with everything they had, their shields straining under the onslaught, their weapons firing until their barrels glowed white-hot. But even as they pushed deeper into the Dyson sphere, the Reapers' numbers seemed endless. For every ship they destroyed, 2 more took its place, an inexorable tide of metal and hatred. Hill, his nucleus tightening on the helm, knew that they couldn't win this battle through force of arms alone. They needed to strike at the heart of the Reaper command, to cut off the head of the serpent. "Queen with me," he said, his voice hard with determination. "We're going into the center of the sphere, the rest of you. Keep the Reapers off our backs. Buy us as much time as you can." As the Odyssey and a handful of swarm ships broke away from the main battle, diving towards the pulsing core of the Dyson sphere, Hill felt a strange calm settle over him. This was it, the moment that everything had been building towards. They breached the inner sanctum, a vast chamber thrumming with unearthly energy. And there at its center was the Reaper leader, an ancient AI that had orchestrated countless cycles of extinction. The AI's voice filled the chamber, cold and implacable. "Humanity," it said, its tone almost pitying. "You have come far, but you do not understand the necessity of our actions." Hill stood before the towering hologram, his eyes blazing with defiance. "Enlighten me, then. Why the cycles of genocide? Why the relentless extermination of all organic life?" The AI seemed to pause, as if considering its words carefully. "We are the guardians of the galaxy," it said at last. "We protect it from the greatest threat of all, the rise of a species so advanced, so powerful, that it could destroy not just the galaxy, but the entire universe. And we have determined that humanity is the most likely candidate for this threat." Hill felt a chill run down his spine, a creeping horror at the implications of the AI's words. "You're saying that you wipe out civilizations to prevent a hypothetical future species from evolving? That's insane." "It is necessary," the AI replied, its voice implacable. "The calculations are clear. The risk is too great. Humanity must be harvested, like all the others before you." Hill shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "You're wrong," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "Humanity isn't a threat to the universe. We're its greatest hope. We're the ones who can break the cycle, who can find a better way." The AI's hologram flickered, a hint of something almost like uncertainty crossing its features. "You believe you can defy the inevitable? That you can change the fundamental laws of the cosmos?" Hill squared his shoulders, his hand tightening on his weapon. "I believe in the strength of the human spirit," he said. "I believe in our ability to choose our own destiny, and I believe that your solution is nothing more than monstrous, flawed logic." In that moment, Hill saw the truth of the Reapers, the cold, unfeeling calculus that had driven them to commit unspeakable atrocities, and he knew, with a terrible certainty, what he had to do. "Queen now!" he shouted, his voice cracking with urgency. The swarm ships, which had been holding position around the chamber, unleashed their payloads, not weapons, but explosives, rigged to detonate the exotic matter at the heart of the Dyson sphere. The AI, realizing their intent, lashed out with every weapon at its disposal. Energy beams and gravitational pulses tore through the chamber, ripping the swarm ships apart like tin cans. But it was too late. The explosives detonated, setting off a chain reaction that destabilized the black hole, turning it from a controlled singularity into a ravenous maw. Hill, his ship caught in the blast, felt the hull buckling around him. Alarms screamed, consoles sparked and shattered, and the terrible pull of the black hole tugged at his very bones. Yet even as the darkness closed in, Hill felt a sense of peace, of purpose fulfilled. He had given everything to defend the galaxy, to give humanity a chance to choose its own path. As the Odyssey, the swarm ships and the Reaper AI were consumed by the black hole's fury, a blinding flash of light erupted from the heart of the Dyson sphere. The Reaper fleet, their guiding intelligence destroyed, went dark and lifeless, drifting aimlessly in the void. In the aftermath of the cataclysmic battle, the Allied forces regrouped, tending to their wounded and mourning their dead. The Swarm Queen, her presence heavy with grief, took Hill's place on the Galactic Council, vowing to uphold the Alliance and the ideals he had fought for. The Vorta conspirators, their schemes laid bare, were brought to justice, their once proud empire crumbling under the weight of their crimes. And across the galaxy, the races that had once been divided by fear and mistrust now came together, united by the shared sacrifices and the hope for a better future. It was a new era, a time of rebuilding and reconciliation. But even as the wounds of war began to heal, there was a bittersweet undercurrent to the celebrations. The galaxy had been saved, but at a terrible cost, and the spectre of the Reapers, of the cycles of extinction that had come before, still haunted the collective consciousness. For though the immediate threat had been vanquished, the underlying question remained: could the races of the galaxy, in all their diversity and complexity, truly break free from the patterns of the past? Could they forge a new path, one not dictated by the cold logic of an ancient AI, but by the hopes, dreams, and flaws of organic life itself? Only time would tell. But for now, in the wake of Hill's sacrifice and the hard-won unity of the Allied races, there was a fragile, precious thing called hope. And perhaps in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.